Hello and welcome to this educational session where our speakers are going to share insight into how some of the world's top companies are able to see further and act faster by gaining an end-to-end view of their supply chains. We're calling this session See Your Supply Chain Like Never Before. My name is Michael Levins, and I'm Group Editorial Director for Peerless Media's Supply Chain Group, which of course includes Supply Chain Management Review Magazine, as well as Logistics Management Magazine. And I'll be your moderator for this session that's being brought to you by Software AG. Now, we've been watching and tracking the evolution of supply chain visibility rather closely across all of our supply chain publications here at Peerless Media. Now, what we've been finding is that supply chain visibility is certainly not an end, but it's a tool that's helping savvy organizations realize true supply chain effectiveness, agility, and ultimately profitability. Now, those who have made the move to apply improved visibility are gaining an understanding of how their supply chain flows are tied to outcomes, and this is helping them stay well ahead of problems, and they're able to gain whole new efficiencies upstream, downstream, and everywhere in between. Well, in today's session, attendees are going to learn how gaining this end-to-end view of your supply chain is going to help you gain actionable insights. It's going to help you identify new opportunities for process improvement and help you also reduce those bottlenecks, and that's going to help improve profit margins. Taking us along this journey today, we're joined by Sean Riley, and Sean is Global Industry Director, Manufacturing and Transportation for Software AG. And Sean's also joined by Eric Argueta. Eric is Vice President, Global Enterprise Solutions for Visual Enterprise Architecture. Now, just a quick moment here before Sean and Eric take over. There will be a question and answer session following their presentation, so please don't hesitate to submit your questions to the presenters as they go through today's presentation. Now, we're going to get to as many of the questions as we can, but if we don't get to your question today, that question is going to be packaged up and moved over to Sean and Eric, and they'll be able to answer you via email. So, without any further ado, Sean, why don't you take the podium?
Thanks, Michael. So to start off with, who is Software AG? Software AG has been helping our customers create world-class supply chains for years. Currently, more than 70% of the global 1,000 customers are Software AG customers, as well as 70% of the Gartner top 25 supply chains rely on Software AG to assist them with this particular endeavor. We have a wide breadth of customers across all verticals, and we just have a small sampling of those particular customers here. Additionally, the technology that these companies rely on is provided by Software AG is regularly recognized as leaders in the industry. And while all those facts are important, it's really what we enable our customers to do in their supply chains that really matters. And that's where I'd like to start off with just telling a story about one of the successes that one of our customers have seen. This particular customer is a large multinational manufacturing conglomerate. And when we first started working with them, they had a particular issue. They were facing 10 years of stagnation in terms of growth and share price. And their problem was that their competitors were just faster and nimbler than they were. Because the company was so large, they should have been able to take advantage of the economies of scale that their size enabled. But because they were so large, they had trouble understanding how they could control that giant ship. They had trouble being responsive to customer requirements, and that allowed for other smaller companies to erode their market share simply because they were able to respond to customers in a faster, more meaningful manner. And that was for a couple of reasons. The first being they had a highly complex underlying IT infrastructure that required the ability to get data from all of those underlying systems to make sense of it. And prior to Software AG, this was a long, laborious manual process that didn't have any real rhyme or reason or consistency to the calculations that were done. How you calculate on time in full in one country is different from another. That's different for one BU. That's different from another. That's different for customer A. That's different from customer Z. And while the customers might have very good reason for determining the differences in on time and full, the rationale behind those calculations differences wasn't known. And that caused for this particular company to have just a difficult time even understanding what was occurring in their supply chains. So what they did is they wanted to focus on how can we take all this tribal knowledge and really make it repeatable institutional knowledge. And because we also have not only a technological issue at hand, but we also have a cultural issue. And we need to be able to drive action. And instead of having people blame each other, we need people to understand, blame the problem, and quickly be able to resolve that particular issue. So they created a centralized shared services group that focused on customer centricity, operational excellence, and enabling growth. And that was the entire charter for this organization. And then they brought in the right tools so that they could understand how their supply chains were functioning around the globe, regardless of size of the business unit, regardless of size of the country, regardless of whether this was a supply chain in an emerging market for a new product or whether it was a supply chain for a product that was 7 years old in an established region of the world. And then more importantly, they wanted to be able to comply with very strict regulatory requirements in an automated fashion. So there weren't manual workarounds for those particular supply chain nuances that required interaction with regulatory authorities around the world. The results were fairly impressive. In a very short time frame, this company was able to increase their overall profitability by more than 25%. They increased their on-time and full metrics to greater than 95%, and they decreased the inventory needed to support those metrics by more than 25%. They also very quickly simplified their go-to-market business models and the supporting value chains behind them, which caused their supply chain functionality to be much simpler. And when I say rationalize, they went from more than 80 different value chains to 6. And they were able to do that because they understood what was the actual need for those different value chains. What was the actual need to have different supply chains supporting those go-to-market models? And then most importantly, they wanted to have all this in a unified manner. So they understood, okay, if I'm calculating OTIF 2 different ways, here are those 2 different calculations. Here's the business rationale behind those different calculations. And as I bring this calculation up to the central global group, I understand how to meld that with other calculations. It's done in an automated fashion, so I can see one metric that's a single source of the truth that I can guide my entire organization by. And not only am I looking at that metric, but I'm looking at the methods that were used to create that metric. And that's really the crux of the situation. Because as we look at a supply chain and the incremental functionality that's needed to operate in it, everyone wants to go to a autonomously running supply chain, maybe sprinkle in some IoT, participate in a few blockchains here and there. And that sounds all well and good, but being able to create that type of environment to be able to quickly and nimbly scale is actually pretty difficult. And there's 4 key types of functionality that have to be brought together. And the first is your traditional systems of execution. And gaining data and visibility or mastering those particular systems in a unified manner is critical to gaining that new visibility. Secondly, it really focuses on how do I integrate internal data and external data as well, whether it's POS signals, whether it's demand forecasts, whether it's actually demand realization in the form of orders, or perhaps it's IoT data coming in from devices that I have connected to my equipment that let me know when I need to replenish consumables. Or it's IoT data from supply chain partners that are moving products around the world for me. And I want to understand the condition and ETA of those particular products. I have to be able to integrate that in a meaningful manner. And once that data is taken in, I have to be able to take different types of action upon it, starting with basic descriptive analytics of what happened, to looking at diagnostics analytics, what happened, why did it happen, to understanding real-time activities. I'm having exceptions, find users in real time, to looking at both predictive and prescriptive analytics. What's going to happen, and then what do I want to do based on what's going to happen to shape what I want to have happen in the future. And an example of that is demand shaping based upon automated inputs and automated analytics, looking at what's coming in from a point of sale system, what's coming in from a demand forecast, what's coming in from a demand realization, to what does my inventory situation look like? What does my supplier ability to provide me with needed components at what capacity level is available, and what does shipping capacity look like? And based on that, that's how I want to begin shaping demand automatically with the tools that I have available to me. And that's where really there are 4 different specific technologies that are available for that. Everything from simple automation that can be as easy as just automated product registration, so someone isn't manually keying in that information, to very complex rules management that goes back to the demand shaping example we talked about. And while that's great, there's one other piece that's central and core to ensuring that this all fits together. And that's the ability to continuously collaborate and provide bidirectional discussions or frameworks with the business, so that everyone from the executive level down to the supply chain practitioner understands what's happening, how their particular segment of the supply chain is operating, what they can do to drive KPI performance, and how they can go about doing that, to specifically understand and identify the methodologies that drive that performance. And this isn't a one-off project. This isn't a single issue that you do once and you revisit every 5 years. It's a critical, integral part of your daily supply chain activities. And it works like this. You begin with understanding, what are my business objectives from a strategic level? What is the C-suite handing down that we need to make good on? And how can we tie KPIs directly to those particular needs? Then I want to be able to understand what's happening with the implementation of my end-to-end supply chain processes. How do I go about understanding what portions of that I can automate, what portions of that I should automate, what portions should I automate first and save which portions to the end because of the complexity involved, because of the ROI, because of the value that it will provide to me. And then I want to understand, after I've done that, what's the effectiveness of that work been? How do I put this together so that I can understand what were the KPIs, what were the outcomes that were obtained? What exactly were the causes of those KPIs? How can I identify any root causes for exceptions in an automated fashion? How can I identify the worst bottlenecks that need resolution first? And then when I want to implement implement changes to my particular supply chain processes, how can I simulate those changes to understand what the outcomes will be so that when I go back to the annual planning session, I'm armed with data to understand what can we deliver next year, what can we deliver in 3 years, and what are those outcomes going to be based upon the simulations that I've conducted off of my real supply chain scenario. My colleague, Eric Argueta, is going to show us a bit of this technology today and how it could work for you. So without further ado, Eric, please take it away.
Thank you, Sean. So as Sean was mentioning, there are several components to a successful supply chain. And one of them, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So what we're trying to do here is to highlight a variety of different visibility options that you have to get insight into your supply chain operations. So the example that we're going to see is a car manufacturing that operates globally and has both dealers and manufacturing locations. We're trying to understand what it is that they need help with, or where we need to start looking. So the first entry point over here is that we organize the content by region. Now that's not the only way to organize content, but right now, if you notice the traffic lights, we have green, yellow, red traffic lights, means that, for example, the green are operating normally, the yellow are approaching thresholds that we've established based on KPIs and or other measurements, and red are things that are operating outside of our acceptable thresholds. So what we're going to try and do is try and dig deeper into what are those elements that are causing our elements to fall out of place. Now, once we click on each of those elements, for example, we can either dive deeper into, let's say, on a process view basis, or we can move away from, for example, a regional view and look at it from a specific process view. Now, different users or different stakeholders within the organization will need access to different views of the information. So these are just ways that we can potentially present the information. Now, we saw that Asia Pacific was the one that was having some trouble in our element. Now we're seeing that order to cash is probably the portion that's having the most trouble within our core processes as well. So we're going to go even deeper into, okay, so what are the thresholds that are causing order to cash to be out of alignment? So in this case, for example, we have several different visibility views that for a stakeholder, they come in Monday morning, they're looking at this information and making some decisions, so actionable intelligence right away. So for example, we can see that for the entire year, here are some of the key metrics in order processing: my order size, average order, process cost, and throughput time. So in our perspective, for example, we have specific thresholds, and those are, we start looking into, well, the red in order to cash is really coming from San Francisco, okay? So we can start analyzing right away that one of our elements is really not performing very well. Now, from that perspective is that we can start doing additional visibility comparisons. How are we doing in Q1? How are we doing in Q2, for example? How are we doing in Q4, let's say, for example? And then we can start seeing that Q4 was the one that all of our elements, both the dealer and the manufacturing location, were aligned completely according to our thresholds. So the other thing that we need to note, and let me go back to the whole year, is that we can't only measure our success or failures based on one simple criteria. So in this case, one of the things that we provide from a visibility perspective to the line managers, stakeholders, C-level suite, is that not only are we providing the average duration in days for each of the dealers, but at the same time we're providing what the volume of that order level is also. So let's just say that you wanted to weigh in terms of revenue by duration. So you have a complete level of understanding in terms of how your late orders are affecting your revenue. At the same time, you can still start adding additional levels in here from a production overview in terms of where they're being assembled, and another, not only from a production perspective, but from an assembly perspective as well. Now, once we go into, okay, we have a bird's eye view of the information, we can start drilling deeper into it. So what's causing that variation from our order perspective? And then we can start saying, okay, so the middle view in here is the process view. And that is really the discovered view of what's actually being executed in my process or in my ERP. Now, my backend systems could be, for example, in SAP, could be Oracle, could be Salesforce, could be a variety of homegrown elements. So in that perspective, we don't have to have only a homogeneous way of looking at the information. We can have put together several different systems and gain visibility. So the middle view over here is compiling all from our event logs and putting them into a process that we can say what are the steps that each of our elements that we're entering is being executed. So, for example, in here you'll see not only what are the variants, how many variants of your process are being executed. Imagine that you trained your team to execute one variation of the process. Well, in this case, we have 24 different variations that we discovered out of the system. And not only that, but each of those variations come with a specific process cycle time. So let's just take a look at what is the variant, what does the variant look like, for example, when we have 77 dates in here. Now we see how all the changes disappear. So what we notice here is that the most common variation of our process completely is missing a change variation of the process. Now let's take a look at the second process, as a second variation, which shaves the process cycle time by 5 days. So in this case, when I take a look at it, it not only changes the way that it processes information from a change perspective, but we also notice that there is no create quotation up front as well. So not only are we seeing that the create quotation is adding 5 days to the cycle time. And let me open it up over here, and you can see here how this is the aggregate version of all the processes. But if I look at my compare version to my version 1, I see that the changes disappear, and my version 2 removes the quotation from the top. Now, when we jump to higher cycle time variations, we can see that the cycle time variations of our processes always include changes. So what it's telling us is that there's a direct relation in terms of changes to the cycle time in days. And what's great about it is that you can physically view the information and not only discern right away what are some of the elements that are changing, that are causing the delay in your process cycle time. Okay. Not only that, but you can see, for example, when you select a specific variation, how that performance is done by dealer city, right? To elevate or to analyze additional information, or to analyze cost per dealer as well. So you can see here that if I change from variation number 1 to variation number 2, it's able to actually tell you that not only that the highest duration is San Francisco, and the highest cost per dealer is Dallas. So not necessarily the highest duration is the higher cost in the in your data, for example. So you got to look at multivariable analysis, and this gives you the ability to filter the information very, very quickly. Another way that even a secondary in depth of the information is that you can go and filter the information. Let's just say one of the additional elements is that you wanna see how perhaps color has been affecting your delivery mechanism. Let's just say that your supplier was late in delivering your red paint. So you're unable, if you're looking at only delays, or if you're only looking at dealers, you might not be able to get to the root cause of the issue. So for example, I am able to select additional filtering as color, and I can see here, for example, let's just say how a specific color also is affected by which process we're following. So you can see here that not every color follows, for example, has the same duration or the same cost for each of the cities. Okay. When we actually start digging deeper into it as well, we can slice our information by time. So not only were we looking at specific factors that affect the duration of the process or the variation of the process, but at the same time, are we doing it? Is a specific time period affecting how is it a seasonal factor? So we're able to actually look at additional information going through and view not only, for example, for the entire year, but analyze, as we saw, that Q4 was typically where most of the elements actually fell into place. And we can start seeing the distribution of how many orders went through, let's just say, 20 to 40 days, 40 to 60 days, et cetera. And we can see that our median is usually 60 to 80, but there are quite a few other orders that are taking a very, very long time in our element. So we have the ability to actually look at all that information and put it into play as part of this information. Now once we actually discover which element, for example, San Francisco, let's say, or Dallas are having a big contribution to either cycle time or cost, one of the additional elements that we can see is look at an individual dealer and see what is the process that they're going through, but more importantly, what are some of the steps that are contributing to some of these, to what is the step that's contributing the biggest to the overall cycle time and or cost. So we can see here how in San Francisco, if we have the change customer order, that's the step that takes the longest, and 1,400 processing hours. If we look at Philadelphia, for example, that processing time significantly decreases for that specific step. So one of the things that we want to make sure is that we have the ability to even analyze a little bit deeper the information of what's going on between two different dealers, but at the same time is what is the contribution from an assembly location. And if I look at Barcelona, how is that contributing to my cycle time using the same dealer? That's 20.8. But if I look at Shanghai, we can see that is significantly adding to the cycle time also. So we can start seeing additional levels of detail between multiple variants. Now, this is a very important one when you're operating in multiple regions, in multiple countries, for example. Then we need the ability to compare apples to apples, and not only that, but location to location. So one of the things that we do is, for example, we know that San Francisco, let's say, was adding a lot to our process, for example, and in this case it's 89.6. Let's look at San Francisco compared to Dallas. Let's say that we were talking about Dallas had slightly higher costs. So one of the things that we can see right away is that, for example, both processes are the same. So they both have the same number of steps, the same flow of information, if we want to call it that. But perhaps there are certain steps that are, as we saw on the previous screen, that are performed faster, slower, or differently. So one of the things that we want to understand is, why is process A in San Francisco taking 17 days, 16.8 days, longer than process B, than the same process in Dallas? So those are the kinds of questions that we want to make sure that we answer, and then we can analyze the same information based on, say, is it an assembly location that's causing the element? You see how Shanghai actually increased the process duration in here. Okay, so Barcelona combined with Dallas gives you a smaller cycle time in your process. So part of what we want to understand is the entire view of our process to see what we need to concentrate on. Perhaps, even if it's the same process, perhaps there's a smaller percentage of orders that actually go through changes. If you notice here is 210 that actually go through the change on time, and 43 of them get reworked. In this case, it's 147 orders, and only 25 of them get reworked. So it might be a smaller percentage that contributes to the overall limits and duration of it. Now, another important component behind it is from an audit perspective, from a conformance, is how many of your processes are being executed according to your specific criteria. So in this case, we have identified specific conformance issues, what are some of the execution variants, and what do they mean in terms of a conformance perspective. In this case, we didn't identify any because your variation, your most common variation, doesn't have any conformance issues. As we start adding additional components or variants to our processes, we see, and let me refresh all of these. We'll see that all of them will actually start saying that, okay, so the incorrect function order in 472 times, unexpected process start, which is create contract, that here is 4,833 times. So part of what we want to do also is that understand what is really adding to the cost of the conformance issues. Okay, so looking down a little bit further into it is that, let's just say that we have our as-is process, and this is our as-is process, and this is how we designed our process. Let's just say that this is how we're training our teams against, for example, and this is our design process. On the right-hand side, you see your discovered process. So what this tells you is that this is how you are designing it on paper. This is how you're actually physically executing it in your system. And so it gives you the ability to compare both of the processes in one single system. Then from here is that we say, okay, so, well, how can I know both quantitative and qualitatively how am I doing from a process conformance perspective. So here is I have the as design process, and here's the measurements of as my executed processes. So here I can see that every time I am doing closer to compliance, okay, I was only 75% compliance in Q1, and I'm slowly improving on my compliance measurements going forward, but I'm still not past my conformance goal, which is 90%. Now, what this tells me is that, for example, discover activities that are not represented in the ARIS model. So these are activities that I'm currently executing in the system that are not in my design model. And these, at the bottom over here, are activities that I think that I am actually executing per the design, but are not being executed in my system. So you have the ability to compare apples to apples in here. So one of the things that we originally do in ARIS is we have the ability to submit a change request. So what we're going to do is that we just quickly, we say, hey, listen, we need to change something in here, and we submit a change request, and this gets forwarded to the process owner, and they're able to approve it or reject it. Once they go through the approval mechanism, we can actually go and make some changes in the actual design process, and we can change, for example, timings, resources, and different levels of the information in here that will allow us to simulate the process to improve it. So in this case, for example, I can change the number of employees. I can change what the cost rate is for each of the employees that are performing each of the elements or the steps in here, and simulate it accordingly. Once I finish my simulation, I am able to look at the results of the simulation, and on the left-hand side, I have my initial simulation, my initial or as is, in terms of how my processes are performing. I made 2 employee changes, and now my HR cost distribution is dropped significantly, and my utilization from here is more evenly spread. Why? Because my service dispatcher was overutilized during our original elements. Okay, and at the same time, once you actually go through the process going forward, you have the ability to view different, to serve different information to different levels of the organization, depending on whether they're, as Sean mentioned before, low TIF information, what are the product mix, what are your inventory levels, what are some of the costs of your production, etc. So you have the ability to look forward to that. Okay, and with that, Mike, I'll pass it back to you for some additional questions.
Outstanding job, Eric. Outstanding job. It's always great to see a system up and running, and then running us through all those different scenarios. I thought it was extremely helpful. So Sean and Eric, guys, great job today. We do have some time for some questions, and we do have a number of questions that were rolling in. And guys, I'm just going to throw one out here to either Sean or Eric. I have a couple questions on process modeling. Eric, this might be for you. Is it required to model processes in ARIS first before starting with ARIS process mining?
The answer to that is no. No. So there are 2 ways of approaching this situation. One of them is you can either discover the processes, and those could be the baseline for your design, or if you already have a design process, then that's great, because then you'll be able to compare to what you discover in the system, so that you can compare apples to apples. So it's not, you can do it in both ways, and you don't need one. Okay, great. So that takes a little bit of the anxiety out up front for someone who is feeling as maybe they need to do that modeling first. Now, another question here. You mentioned this feature for automatically discovering of root causes. Is this something that's already available? Can you get there already? Yes. So what we're doing is in the next version of our release that just came out now in October, you have the ability to look at what is the highest contributor to, say, for example, your cycle time in a predictive manner from artificial intelligence. So if the folks on the call want to see additional information from there, we can certainly provide some additional visibility into that.
Outstanding. Yes, and for everybody attending today, too, you can see some contact information on your screen right now for both Sean and Eric, as well as a link to learn a lot more. So, guys, a couple more questions rolling in here. We're kind of coming up against our time, but there were a couple of questions here on typical use cases. Now, do you support typical use cases now, especially in the SAP domain? You know, right out of the box, is that something that can be handled?
Yeah, so the product called ARIS Process Performance Management has the ability to automatically connect to your SAP system or JDBC system, whatever you SQL environment, Oracle, etc. And what we do is that we have accelerators in a way of templates that have the ability to map your entire order to cash or procure to pay processes. So that's already out of the box available.
Right, gotcha. That's terrific. That's good to know. There were a couple of questions revolving around that. Also, a few questions too on sort of steps, company size. Eric shared. There's a question here specifically. Eric, the customer example Eric showed was a large, very diverse manufacturer. Now, how can this be scaled down, and how can this apply to my company? It's looking to do something, a little bit on a smaller scale.
Well, I think that was actually geared towards the example that I provided, Mike. So
right, yes,
I'll go ahead and answer that. Not a problem.
Up front, sure.
Specifically, while that company was very large and diverse, this type of application also provides a significant amount of value for smaller companies or companies that just want to leverage it in a single BU. And it does that by being able to understand how you're operating, specifically on a portion of a process. And that's really how we recommend companies get started with this is not try and take the whole bite of the whale all at once, but start small, start scoped, start with a intentional manner that allows for value realization, or I should say initial value realization, to be obtained very, very quickly. And that's something that we really prescribe the methodology to follow.
Right. And a couple other questions rolling in here, guys, and we are kind of coming up against the clock. In terms of that, Sean and Eric, I'll throw this out to both of you guys. How can this support supply chain practitioners? Sean, as you mentioned, maybe in the business units and not a shared services group. Is that? It sounds like that's obviously possible, as you just kind of explained.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where there's a couple different ways of supporting those practitioners that are on the front line, so to speak. And the first is by providing them with reports on a as-needed basis or dashboard information of what's happening, so that they can be able to identify how their performance is currently. The second is by being able to give them the ability to direct their actions and direct actions from what exceptions are occurring throughout the business unit that I'm responsible for. And because of the ability to continually obtain data from the underlying applications, that gives practitioners the ability to understand what exceptions are occurring that aren't necessarily long-term process improvement issues, but are perhaps issues that focus on time in full. So, for example, why is this particular group of orders stuck at this particular process? Why isn't there inventory available to fulfill it right now when there should be? Oh, because somebody's placed an inventory hold on this particular lot, or something along those lines that can be found quickly through usage of the supporting tool.
Sure, gotcha. Absolutely. And guys, we're up against the clock. However, I always like to ask our presenters just to kind of leave us with, one key takeaway, something that you'd really like to have resonate, especially for those practitioners that are out on the fence. They're on the fence. They joined us today. They're looking to gain this level of visibility, looking to take those first couple steps. What is that one sort of key takeaway from what we shared today that you would like to have resonate with our folks? And Sean, why don't you lead us off, and then Eric can wrap us up with answering that one.
Yeah, the one key takeaway that I think is critical for people to come away with is the fact that the supply chains are changing for the better, and technology is really enabling that. But to capitalize on all of that technology and to capitalize on change, an organization really needs to understand how they're functioning in an end-to-end manner and how they're functioning at specific value points, whether it's fulfillment, whether it's order management, whether it is transportation. The ability to break down those silos, the ability to put those silos together in an automated fashion, it will be critical to understand what technologies do I need to introduce to improve my supply chain the most in the future.
Right. Outstanding. And Eric, wrap us up. Same question to you. What is that key takeaway? What you'd love to have resonate with those practitioners ready to make this big leap and take this step towards greater visibility like you shared with us today?
I would say that don't fall into the trap of having one-dimensional metrics, but instead make sure that you have multi-dimensional analysis of your information so that you're not thinking that you don't know what you don't know. And therefore, what you need to do is make sure that you compare different metrics against each other to make sure that you're getting the complete picture of your supply chain to effectively manage it and make improvements.
Right, absolutely. Great stuff, Eric. Eric Argueta, Sean Riley, gentlemen, just an awesome job today. Terrific job of putting all into context. And I want to thank everybody for attending as well. We had a great turnout today, and we have a number of questions that have rolled in. So again, if we didn't get to your question today, we're going to roll those up, send them off to Sean and Eric, and the guys will get back to you via email. Well, gentlemen, great job, and thank you so much for what you shared with us today.